So let's continue our SharePoint learning journey. In this video, we will try to understand how can we read and write data to SharePoint from remote locations. Now let me first explain what this question is all about. Now SharePoint has data which is stored in list, right? Normally it's stored in list, and if you want to go and manipulate this list, right? If you remember, right, previous part of the video, what we did is we had something called as the SharePoint object model, right? And you can go and create a ASP.NET web part, and this ASP.NET web part can go and interact with the SharePoint object model, who in turn can go and interact with the list, to do manipulation. Now this is well and good. Now because you can go and install this ASP.NET web part as a part of your SharePoint, in other words, because you can go and upload this web part into the SharePoint server, this SharePoint object model is accessible. But now let's take a different kind of scenario. Let's say that you have an application which is remotely running, or I'll say, or let me just complicate this more. Let me say that this application is probably a Java application. So how can this application now go and interact with your list, go and manipulate your list, go and read your list, or I'll rather say how it can go and interact with SharePoint to read and write data from the SharePoint server. So for such external applications, what SharePoint has done is it has exposed its services via REST. Now what is REST? REST is nothing but it's an architectural style. It's an architectural style of exposing your data on the web. Now I will not go into details of REST here, because we have a complete 15 minutes video which is dedicated to REST in WCF questions and answers video series. You can watch that video and you can understand what exactly is REST. But just putting it very simply, when you expose your data using REST, that means you are using simple HTTP protocol, you are using simple methods like post, get, put, delete. In other words, you are exposing your service in the most simplest manner so that everybody in the world can call your service. So because you are exposing via REST services, now the external applications, it can be a Windows application, it can be a Java application, and anybody in the world can make a call to a REST service, and your REST service will internally make call to the list to do read, update, delete, and those kind of activities. Now this REST enablement is only possible because of WCF services. WCF services is the main backbone due to which this complete data of SharePoint is exposed to the web using REST services. So without WCF services, this REST enablement is not possible. And you'll see that when we want to enable REST, we have to go and install the WCF services setup. So we'll talk about that when we start doing the practicals. So what will happen now? So your application will go and make a call to REST services, and the REST service will internally go and make a call to the list, and in that way basically any external applications which is residing outside the boundary of SharePoint context can still go and make a call to the SharePoint data. So what we'll do now is, let's go and create a simple list in SharePoint, and let's try to access that list using a Windows application. Let's see how it looks like. So here's a simple practical we'll be doing. Here's a simple HR site, and on this HR site we have a list here called as urgent news. Now this urgent news list is nothing but the HR of the company will be posting any kind of urgent news which it wants to broadcast to his employees over here. Now what the HR of the company thought is that rather than the employees coming and logging to the site and seeing the urgent news over here, how about going and creating a simple Windows form, and this Windows form will go and poll this urgent news list on the SharePoint and display all the news on this list over here. So in simple words, what we have to do is we have to expose this urgent news list via REST services and consume that REST service in this Windows form, and then by using a timer we would like to poll that REST services in a predefined time. So let's go ahead and do this practical. Now as we have said previously, that in order to enable REST services, or in order to expose your list, your SharePoint list or SharePoint data via REST service, you need to have WCF services, or rather I'll say very specifically, you need to have WCF data services installed in your server. So now this WCF data services is nothing but it's a small installable which you can go and download from the Microsoft site. Now there are two versions to this WCF data services. One is for Windows 7 and Windows 2008 R2, and the second one is for Windows Vista and normal Windows Server 2008 without R2. Okay, so depending on what kind of server you have, you need to go and install the appropriate data services. If you want to quickly find where the WCF data services is, you can just go and Google, and the first link which comes actually points towards the installable or towards the download of WCF data services. So step 1, you need to go and install WCF data services so that you can expose your SharePoint list via REST. Now once you have installed WCF data services, you can now go and access your data via REST services. So in order to access your data via REST services, you need to go and type your server name / the site name, that is Quest HR, and you need to type _VTI_bin / list data.svc. Now this format is absolutely fixed, so you can just just remember the format. Now if I press enter over here, you can see now my complete list, my complete SharePoint list is now exposed as XML out to the outside world, exposed via REST services. Now you can go and consume this REST service, this REST WCF service which is exposed here, and you can go and start making calls to your urgent news list. So if you scroll below, somewhere down below, you should have your urgent news list. So that's it. So now I can go and take this REST service URL, add a service reference to my Windows form, and then go and get access to this urgent news list. So let me copy this, and let's go back to our Windows form here. Let me close this, and let's go and add a service reference to the REST service. So let me go and paste over here. I'll say go. Now this should go and generate a proxy object, and using that proxy object we can make service calls to the SharePoint list. So you can see I'm getting the complete collection of list over here, and one of the thing which we are interested in is urgent news. So let me do OK over here. So this will generate the proxy object. Now let me just go and drag and drop a button over here. So this button will actually, the end user can press this button and get the latest news. So I'll give this name as, must be something like refresh. Right. Now let's double click on this refresh, and let's start calling the WCF REST services here, and let's bind that REST service collection, that urgent news collection, to our to our grid view source which we have on this form at this moment, to the data grid. So let's double click on this refresh button, and let's start writing some code here. The first step is you need to go and create the object of the context. So let's start step 1, creating the context object. Service reference 1.quest HR data context, that's a class. Context is equal to new service reference 1 quest HR data context. Now the context object is always attached to a REST service URL. So currently our REST service URL is the same here, quest HR /_VTI_bin / list data.svc. So if you see this quest HR data context constructor, it is expecting a URI object. So let's give him new URI, and let's paste that URI here. You can always go and remove this hard coding by putting this into the appropriate config files. So step 1, go and create the object of the context, okay, and give your REST service URL to the context object. Now if you see this context object, if you go and do a dot here in your IntelliSense, you can see that it has the collection of all the lists which you have in your Quest HR site. So one of our list which we are interested at this moment is the urgent news. So you can see now this urgent news is nothing but it's actually a collection here, right? So what we'll do is let's go and access this urgent news collection and bind it to a data grid, right? So for that, let's go and create a list of first the urgent news collection. So I'll just say this is urgent news collection, and we will use the context object to get the urgent news collection. And now this urgent news collection, right, if you see, if you just move your mouse here, it's actually at this moment it's a data service query object. So we need to convert this to a list here, because at the left hand side you have a list. So that's very easy. There's a function here called as toList. So convert this to urgent news simple list collection. So step 1, we went and we first created the context object. Step 2, we have accessed the complete collection of urgent news and we have brought it into a list. Now the last step is we need to go and bind this list to our data grid. So that's pretty easy. So we'll just say a data grid view 1 dot data source is equal to O urgent news collection, and we are done. So create the context object, bring the collection in, and then bind the collection to the data grid. Right. Now let's run this application, and let's go and click on this refresh button. And we have an error there. So let's go and see what the error is. I have actually kept this error so that we can see what the error is. Now you can see that the error is unauthorized, and that is right. My Quest HR site, is only accessible when you put the administrator user ID and password. So any kind of calls, which you are making from this external system, will not go directly, will not be a very seamless one. You need to actually also provide the credentials so that you get access to the list. So you can see, like, currently, because I'm not providing any credentials, it is saying me that you are an unauthorized user. So let's go and provide the credentials so that we can get access to the list. Now the credentials can be provided via the O context object, the context object which you have created. So if you see the O context object, right, there is a property here called as credentials, you can see. So we need to go and provide the credentials over here. So the first thing is, in order to provide the credentials, you need to go and import system.net, because we'll need the network credential class here. So we need to go and import the system.net here. And now let's go to the O context object and say credentials is equal to new network credentials. Now you can see the network credential class has a constructor where you can give your username and password. So I'm going to go and provide my username and password here. So administrator and pass @123. You can always go and encrypt these things, but currently I've just kept it as it is for just for demonstration purpose. So now that I've given him the credentials, now I should be able to go and make calls to my urgent news collection and get the collection, right? So now let's go and let's run the program again. Let's see if it works now, and let's click on refresh. You can see that the complete list is now, the complete collection is now binded to the list. Currently I have by default my data grid is set to auto generate true. So what has happened is it has binded all the columns what are available in the list. But you can clearly see that the title over here which is displayed. So please revert ASAP and budget overshoot it. The same data was present in our Quest HR site, and the same data has been displayed onto this form here. So if I go and add a new announcement here, let's say, let me just go and add a new announcement here. So we'll say, hey, this is new announcement. This is new announcement. I'll just save this. Now let's go back to our Windows form here, and let me do a refresh. Let's see what happens. And you can see that the third announcement is also now displayed onto my Windows form. Cool. So that was a simple demonstration wherein we consumed the WCF REST services in our Windows form, and we try to display the data from SharePoint list. Now in the same way, if you wish to go and update objects, if you want to go and add new objects, you can always go and use the O context object, and you can go and update objects over here. So for example, you can call the update object method, pass in the entity object, that is your urgent news object here, and go and update this object if you wish. So again, the procedure is very simple here. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. In this video, what we did is we exposed SharePoint objects, or I'll say SharePoint data, list data, using REST services, and then that REST service was consumed in this Windows form here, and we binded that data, the the list data, on the data grid. Thank you very much.